அவையோர் அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். Good morning to all dignitaries on the dais and off the dais, including my esteemed brother judges and the learned advocates and the media persons. Time flies, but not before leaving a shadow behind which we may linger or we may not may linger. A year has passed since we met on the first Rakesh Endowment lecture for justice and equity. Today is the second lecture to be delivered by an illustrious personality. Before we move on, I request you all to stand for the Tamil Thai Valthu. Tamil Thai Valthukkaga அனைவரும் எழுந்து நிற்கும்படி கேட்டுக்கொள்கிறேன்.
நீராறும் கடலுடுத்த நிலமடந்த கெழிலொழுகும் சீராரும் வதனமென திகழ் பரத கண்டமிதில் தெக்கனமும் அது சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு பிறை நுதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே அத்திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழமை திறம்பியந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே.
Thank you. நன்றி. Our beloved Rakesh, it is your 27th birthday that we celebrate today. விடிவெள்ளி இல்லாமல் உலகம் விடிவதில்லை, விடிவெள்ளி இல்லாமல் உலகம் விடிவதில்லை, விடிந்து விட்டதால் விடிவெள்ளியின் மறைவும் நிரந்தரமும் அல்ல. ராகேஷ், நீ காணலின் நீரோ என்றால் காணலின் நீரும் அல்ல, தோற்றப்பிழையோ என்றால் தோற்றப்பிழையும் அல்ல, தோற்ற மயக்கமும் அல்ல, அற்ப மாயம் அல்ல, சொற்பனம் அல்ல. நீ விடிவெள்ளி தோன்றிக்கொண்டே இருப்பாய் எங்கள் நெஞ்சங்களில் நிரந்தரமாய். Respected senior advocate, the member of parliament, Dr. ABISHEIK SINGHVI, that we are assembled here to celebrate about an illustrious son, would have been an illustrious son. You are also an illustrious son of an illustrious father. Our Rakesh, our brother N.R. Ilongo, he would have been illustrious son, of course, but I'm a believer, it cannot be stopped. But what I want to tell you is our brother and Aruna, Madam Aruna, my sister Aruna, had not fallen to the ground grieving forever. And here we have the Rakesh Law Foundation, Rakesh Satta Arakattalai, together to enlighten and to spread the light. And we are here, sir. And today's lecture is the Rakesh Endowment lecture for justice and equity, Needhiyum Nyayamum, which reminds me also, sir, whether democracy also. Today's Rakesh Endowment lecture is being organized by the Rakesh Law Foundation and Roja Muthaiya Research Library, a library named after another illustrious personality, Roja Muthaiya, a ferocious leader and a book collector. May I now request Thiru G. Sundar, Director Roja Muthaiya Research Library, to... before that, we have to unveil the program, and I request the dignitaries on the dais to unveil today's program, the Endowment Lecture of Rakesh Foundation. Thank you, sir. May I now request Mr. Sundar to welcome the gathering.
Good morning to all of you. We are here to celebrate the birth anniversary of Rakesh Ranganathan, a cheerful dear boy. I warmly welcome all of you for this August event. Rakesh Endowment Lecture was constituted by the Rakesh Law Foundation at the Roja Mutaya Research Library. This is the second annual lecture that is being organized, and the first lecture was delivered by Honorable Member of Parliament THIRU Kapil Sibal last year. Now, I welcome the Honorable Member of Parliament and Senior Counsel, THIRU Dr. ABISHEIK Singhvi, to deliver the second Rakesh Endowment Lecture. He will deliver a talk on the pillars of Indian democracy. A small note about Dr. Singhvi. Dr. ABISHEIK Singhvi's multifaceted and versatile personality straddles public life, media, law, and academia. Known as the ultimate multitasker, he manages these diverse areas with excellence, commitment, and sincerity, and is rated amongst the top in each. He is a senior, three-term sitting MP. He currently chairs the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Commerce. In 2011, he also chaired the Standing Committee on Law and Justice, and in 2022, he also briefly chaired the significant Parliamentary Standing Committee on Home. In 2022, he was elevated to the Congress's supreme decision-making body, the Congress Working Committee. He was India's youngest designated senior advocate at a very young age of 34 and India's youngest additional Solicitor General at age 37. An eminent jurist and a front-ranking senior counsel of the Supreme Court, Dr. Singhvi is also a well-known author and columnist and a visible media personality. His last book, From the Trenches, selects 8 judgments argued by him, which have impacted the nation, and tries to tell the story behind the story regarding each trial. He has been an articulate spokesperson for our constitutionally guaranteed rights. I warmly welcome Dr. ABISHEIK Singhvi. I also take the pleasure in welcoming THIRU Sashi Kumar, Chairman of the Asian College of Journalism, one of the most important schools that provides cutting-edge education in the field in India. Sashi Kumar is a print and a broadcast journalist, filmmaker, and media entrepreneur. He founded and chairs the Media Development Foundation, which administers the Asian College of Journalism. He was among the earliest newscasters in English on national television, Doordarshan, Middle East correspondent of The Hindu, and news anchor on Radio Bahrain in mid-1980s. He has anchored and produced numerous shows, documentaries, and features for national television. AsiaNet, India's first satellite TV channel in a regional language, that is Malayalam, and the country's first statewide cable TV network in Kerala. In 2004, he scripted and directed Kaya Taran, an award-winning Hindi feature film based on the 1984 anti-Sikh riots and the 2002 Gujarat riots. He has also acted in a few films. The title Unmediated, he has been published, that comprises his essays and articles on media, culture, and cinema. It was published by Tulika Books in 2013. I welcome THIRU N.R. Ilango, Honorable Member of Parliament, who will be giving the introductions to the foundation, and Dr. Raghavi Ilango, a medical doctor by training and a trustee of the Rakesh Law Foundation, also the daughter of N.R. Ilango, and also welcome his family here. I welcome all the judges, advocates, politicians, and bureaucrats on behalf of the Rakesh Law Foundation and Roja Mutaya Research Library. I also bid a warm welcome to Madam Kanimari, Member of Parliament, and also.
Now for Mr. Shashi Kumar. Honor you, sir. Thank you, NRE. Now can I call upon you for an introduction of the Rakesh Law Foundation and its purposes.
Respected Dr. ABISHEIK SINGHVI, respected Mr. Shashi Kumar, Madam Kanimari Karunanidhi, Honorable Minister Mr. Shekhar Babu, Honorable Judges Justice P.T. Dinagaran, Justice C.T. Selvam, Justice Chandru, Justice Sundar Mohan, and Justice Lakshmi Narayanan. Dear friends, advocates and law students, and my family members, this is the second lecture being organized by Rakesh Endowment Lecture for Justice and Equity. Rakesh Law Foundation was founded on the untimely demise of my son Rakesh Ranganathan. My friends and his friends know that Rakesh is a gentle and lovable soul. As I said in the first lecture, myself, my wife, and my daughter have decided not to weep his departure, but to celebrate his life. We still feel he's alive with us. We will never feel that. Saying about Rakesh, he was always very fond of discussions. So, on every 16th of April, Rakesh Law Foundation has decided to organize lectures for the benefit of the lawyers and the law students. For that, we have decided to invite and request the best of best legal minds in the country. I would like to quote Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, in his book Meditations. Pause then through this little space of time comfortably to nature and end the journey in content, just as an olive falls off when it is ripe, blessing nature who produced it and thanking the tree on which it grew. Nature was not kind to me ever. It has taken my father when I was 7, my mother when I was 21, my best of best friends, Ilango, Michael, Abhirama Sundari, when they should not. Lastly, it has taken my son also. But I will be gentle to the nature. I know every soul is having a duty in this world. My duty is to serve, be with you, and as much as possible to give back to the society from which I come. Because what I am today is because of the society. What I am today is because of my seniors, my teachers, my friends, my relatives, and the party which I belong to. Rakesh is always fond of our Honorable CM. So, this journey of mine in returning back to the society will continue forever. And in one of such attempt, Rakesh Law Foundation also adopted a corporation school in Chennai at Chennai Nagar. Through Rakesh Law Foundation, we are organizing English classes to the students from United States through Zoom meetings. We are giving them RO water for all the students. We are organizing NEET coaching classes to them, so on and so forth. And we help them in organizing science clubs, science exhibitions. All that is also being done by Rakesh Law Foundation. Apart from that, we are trying to identify the best of law students in our state and to help them in pursuing their higher degrees or to practice, to put them in with the best officers, to make them as good advocates. Though I need not ask you, but still I want to ask your continued support to the Rakesh Law Foundation in its endeavor to give back to the society from which I am coming and you are coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nailango, our friend. Rakesh, சுடர்கதிராய் அறிவொளி பாய நிந்தன் பெயர் வாழ்க நிரந்தரம் அதனை நிலைநிறுத்தும் உனது பெற்றோர்களும் உனது தமக்கையும் அதனை எப்போதும் நிலைநிறுத்துவார்கள் ராகேஷ் சட்ட அறக்கட்டளை மூலம் என்ற நம்பிக்கையுடன் Today we have the Rakesh Endowment lecture to be delivered by one of the illustrious personality of India. I do not know the lawyers over here. How many of you have heard him when he was either in the court or in the parliament? Sir, you are an illustrious son of an illustrious person, father. And you have sought fearless fighter of justice in the courts of law and thunderous orator in the parliament opposition bench. I know that we have one of the finest personality before us. Today's topic is also to be the pillars of Indian democracy. And as I said, wither democracy. And I think that you are going to enlighten us on it, sir. Thank you very much. Please, sir.
Vanakkam. Unfortunately, this is the only Tamil word I know. But as I was telling my colleague on the dais, there are some languages you don't need to know to understand. Anybody who's speaking it just now, and I just said what I told him, the alliteration, the musical tonality of the language interprets itself. And it's quite amazing how much of alliteration and music there is in that language, even for a person who is not otherwise well-versed in Tamil. Friends, all the esteemed persons of the dais, the Sutradhar, the host of this function, Mr. Elango, distinguished members of this very august audience, my colleague parliamentarians, distinguished journalists, lawyers, judges, members of civil society, and of course students, ladies and gentlemen. This pleasant occasion of a memorial lecture is of course tinged with sadness and melancholy at the passing away of so young a life, at the demise of a young soul so full of promise and potentiality. But sometimes we are left with no other option than to remind ourselves or console ourselves with the saying that those whom the gods love die young. But we must all acknowledge the stoic dignity and the commendable courage with which Elango and his family have faced this tragedy. Their fortitude has been exemplary. I have known Elango for several years as a colleague at the bar, as a colleague in Parliament. His soft-spoken, but steadfast commitment to core values has shone through consistently. He is a firm and dynamic believer in all his diverse responsibilities, but never brash, intrusive, or abrasive. Those qualities of head and heart must necessarily have been put to the test by this heart-rending tragedy. But he and his family have internalized this setback and have converted it to public good and public service by a series of charitable activities. I am sure God will give him and his family the continued courage and fortitude to bear this irreparable loss and the zeal to consecrate the memory of his son by so many laudable initiatives, many of which you have just heard about. Friends, we address the topic of pillars of Indian democracy in the 75th year of our republic. This topic is important in any year, at any phase of a nation's life, but it is particularly memorable in its 75th year. And it is also a topic which we must keep reminding ourselves of, because it's so easy to take it for granted. And because it is easy to take democracy for granted, it is easy to take the values which underlie it for granted. And therefore, sometimes when we speak of this at lectures or interactions, we start learning how to cherish these core values. As far as pillars are concerned, there are institutional pillars which are more tangible, more visible, more known. But possibly if I was forced to choose the non-institutional pillars of Indian democracy, would be even more important, less tangible, less visible, more abstract, but nevertheless fundamental pillars on which our democracy exists, stands. And therefore, any dilution or weakening of these pillars, the slightest diminution or the continuance of assaults, direct or indirect, explicit or implied, over a period of time, is again an issue which is linked. So while we celebrate, we must acknowledge, we must perhaps mourn, and we must reform. Let me start by asking a question which I've asked so many audiences across the world. Of course, there is no answer to the question, both international and domestic. But that really links with the theme we are discussing today. The question is that from the 1930s to the 1950s or 60s, roughly 25, 30 years, there are several countries which emerged from the yoke of imperialism across the world. They emerged from British imperialism, from Dutch imperialism, from Belgian imperialism, from French imperialism, and so on and so forth, across the length and breadth of Australasia, Africa, South America, large swathes of territory. And yet, even in the 70s, 80s, and certainly now, you see only the wrecks and ruins of constitutionalism for each and every one of those who emerged from the yoke of imperialism. As far as democracy is concerned, maybe barring one or two exceptions which I can't think about, India remains the shining exception, and certainly the only one near, even remotely near its size, the shining exception of a vibrant democracy which emerged in that period. So the question which I start with is, why? How? How is it possible that a country the size of India has achieved this? I frankly have really no answer. If I'm forced to give the answer, the honest, truthful answer, the first answer is sheer good luck. But if you dig a little deeper and you are forced to look for logical answers, then, and this is entirely a personal view, each person will have a different view. Each person will have a different perspective and should, in a democracy, have it. But the other answer I can think of is that we probably got the sequencing right. Of course, we got the sequencing right, not necessarily by design, but we just got it right. The sequencing being Gandhi first, followed by Nehru. There is possibly no more or greatest agitational politician across the globe at any point of time, no greater agitational politician than Gandhi. And without Gandhi, the idea of getting independence from the British might have remained at least a distant dream. And that he did it by non-violent means. He did it in a certain finite period of time is itself a miracle. And Gandhi's, of course, biggest weapon was that he had no hiatus between preaching and practice. But just consider what would have happened if Gandhi was the first Prime Minister of India. Gandhi, according to me, might have been just too idealistic to have been the Prime Minister of India. So we got the sequencing right in that we got Nehru following Gandhi, the eternal liberal, left of center, originally Fabian socialist, somewhat dreamy, romantic public figure, rooted, of course, in Gandhi and Gandhian philosophy, but also pragmatic on so many governance issues. Possibly a reversal of that sequence might not have produced the same results, because it is the first 20 years of a nascent republic where you need to dig in your roots and make it a firm democracy. Possibly the other South Asian neighbors we had would also have become democracies if those first 15 to 20 years had been allowed where you could dig in your heels for democracy. They could not, we could. And the fact that we could was largely because of Nehru. So having given you that backdrop, let me straight away turn to the more direct theme for today, the pillars of Indian democracy. But as I start on those several pillars, I must say with a deep sense of sadness and trepidation that many of the pillars I'm going to discuss with you have been either severely undermined or are in the process of being recast as pygmies and not pillars. The hiatus between preaching and practice is humongous. And as we go and discuss each of these pillars, non-institutional or institutional, we must underline, highlight the more insidious attempts to diminish these pillars, to dilute them. More insidious because it is camouflaged, covert, indirect, frequently devious and manipulative. And we have to guard against that. So this lecture is as much about identifying and celebrating those pillars as telling you how to be aware of their diminution. The first of those pillars, and a non-institutional pillar, is secularism. One of those most maligned words. But kindly consider it in this context. India is planet Earth's most diverse spot. There is no more or no greater diversity on planet Earth than India. Whether you call it a melting pot or a salad bowl, you cannot even imagine a congregation of 22 scheduled languages, 700 mother tongues, 2,000 dialects, the largest population of 4 religions, the second largest population or possibly the third largest population of Muslims, diversity of smells, sounds, dresses, races, ethnicities, foods, rituals. There is no end to these parameters. In this context, secularism is never a largesse which you offer to citizens. It is actually a self-preservative. There is no doubt that it's been a defaced and attacked and somewhat diluted word. It has even become a subject of comic sarcasm. So I looked for an appropriate definition of secularism, and I found probably one of the good, simple ones by Professor Rajiv Bhargav, formerly of Harvard University. He adapted the Lincolnian phrase, of the people, by the people, for the people, and said, we can understand for the people. Democracy is for the people. By the people we can understand because it's voting by the people. He said, why did Lincoln use the phrase of the people? That's an odd phrase to use. And then he answered the question himself saying that of the people is supposed to convey a sense of co-ownership of democratic India to each of its inhabitants. It is supposed to be like a joint family ownership, a co-ownership. Some small amount is co-owned by each person. And that brings in automatically so many different concepts of inclusion, of participation. Indeed, the other two words of the preamble, which have been there, and secularism was not there earlier, as you know, are also linked inextricably, fraternity and equality. These are all concepts from the preamble and in operational reality which cross-fertilize each other. Yes, secularism found its way much later, about 25 years down the line in our republic in 1976. There is a debate going on out there whether it should at all be there. Some people say it's inherent. Some people say it's not necessary to put it there. But the real point is that if it is inherent, it is far so important that it must be explicitly underlined. So when it was brought in 1976 onwards, it is certainly a jewel in the crown, and it is a non-derogable jewel in the crown. There is no doubt that it is part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. As you know, the basic structure of the Indian Constitution is a remarkable doctrine, which is the pride of India and the envy of the world, and many nations have copied it. It's a remarkable doctrine because it says that even a constitutional amendment by a 2/3 majority of Parliament in its constituent amending power, even a constitutional amendment can be declared unconstitutional. So, when you understand these ramifications, the limits, the boundaries of secularism, when you understand the context of India itself, you realize very fast that you cannot have imposition of uniformity upon diversity. You cannot convert unity in diversity, a much bandied phrase, into uniformity upon diversity. You cannot contemplate deliberate injections of hate speech, of divisive politics, especially when they come from persons of pelf, power, or patronage. And you need to recognize the obvious again and again, because if you don't recognize, you begin to take it for granted, and after recognition, you need to speak up about it when you can, where you can. Otherwise, what will apply to you is that old famous saying, when they came for the Jews, nobody spoke up, and when they came for the Christians, you did not speak up, and when they came for somebody else, you kept silent. When they came for you, there was nobody to speak up for you. Friends, continuing on the theme of secularism for a few moments more, our neighbor Pakistan imploded shortly after independence. Today it is teetering on the brink of extinction. Have Indian standards fallen so low that we are now reduced to comparing ourselves to Pakistan? I was quite intrigued, indeed I would say dismayed and stunned, to find the Indian finance minister using Pakistan's diminishing minority population as a comparator for Indian secularism. Were it not coming from a high constitutional post holder, it would be both contemptible and laughable. Apart from being a false and misleading non-comparator, the very reference to Pakistan as a standard shows the depths we are plumbing. And if the minuscule minority population of Pakistan, a self-professedly theocratic state, has declined, can it be a reference point to the world's largest democracy, with possibly the third largest concentration of a particular minority? And their expanding numbers, can those numbers, which are anyway so high, both in percentage and absolute terms, be ever expected to diminish? And can therefore the Finance Minister of India exult because they have not diminished in India, and use that as a comparator? Then again, now these are, of course, I have traveled from the philosophical, conceptual idea of secularism to the practical, operational reality, which is what I'm going to do for each pillar. I'm going to tell you the concept of the pillar. I'm going to tell you the philosophical underlying idea of the pillar. But I'm also have to be honest with you and to be frank and candid, telling you the current contemporary state of that pillar. So then again, irrespective of rhetorical slogans like Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, can India or its largest state, Uttar Pradesh, which is the size of Europe, in fact exceeding that size, justify what is this new, I've never in my long years of practice or otherwise heard of this bulldozer Raj. And bulldozer Raj to the power of 2, because it's actually targeted against specific communities. Is this our way of extending assurance, trust and faith to groups and communities, which is the heart of secularism? One amazingly delightful facet of this innovative, state-conducted, terrifying tactic called bulldozer Raj is that 5 or 7-year-old notices for minor infractions of building bylaws, which are either regularizable or compoundable or are pending with no action taken, are not acted upon for 5 or 7 years. But the moment the occupant of that property participates in a protest or a demonstration against the powers that be, that notice is activated and the bulldozer arrives shortly to wreak, precisely because you have joined a protest or a morcha against the ruling party. And this is all done in the midst of applause. It is done in the midst of cleaning up the system kind of thinking. So this is unfortunately the true scope of this vital non-institutional pillar of democracy, but sadly also some of its distortions. I now turn to a second vital non-institutional pillar of Indian democracy, federalism. It's quite interesting. I did a Google search many years ago of the Indian Constitution, and I found federal word 20, 30 times. So I was very intrigued because as far as I know, this pillar of the Indian Constitution, something which is fundamental, does not find any mention in the whole Indian Constitution. And mind you, the Indian Constitution is one of the largest in the world. It's among the 10 longest constitutions. So when I checked up my Google search, I found that all the references to federalism were actually to the federal court, which preceded and pre-existed the Supreme Court. There is no word called federalism in the Indian Constitution. But yet, it is part of our basic structure. So just imagine how interesting, ironical, and important it is that federalism, a word not found in the preamble, not found in the Constitution, is part of our basic structure. It was held so even before, but certainly from Bommai onwards. Bommai is a 1994 judgment. From Bommai onwards, federalism has been held by 9 judges to be part of the basic structure. So what I'm going to spend some time on now is how the designers of India and the Indian Constitution, for a variety of very, very clever and very, very far-sighted people, I don't think we ever can match the far-sightedness and the depth and the genius of our Constituent Assembly, howsoever much we might think that we are the cat's whiskers. But the people, while cognizant of the need for federalism, actually designed at inception a largely unitary structure. They were very scared because of the fissiparous tendencies rampant around them because of the riots, the killings, and they were really scared, and the debates of the Constituent Assembly show that India might not survive as a single unit. So by design, they created a largely unitary structure. Not as unitary as England, but largely unitary. And what I'm going to discuss in the second part of this is how that designed, deliberate, broadly unitary structure by accidental and inadvertent federalism has become very, very much more federal. And it's called accidental inadvertent federalism, not as per constitutional design. And then in the third part of this, I will tell you, of course, the diluting, distorting, and damaging features of federalism in practice today. Now, the first part is interesting because it has been considered always that federalism is like a safety valve. It's like a pressure cooker which we use in our kitchens because it lets off steam. Federalism manages diversities. It's in that sense a close cousin of secularism. It manages the 3 Ds: dissent, dissatisfaction, and a feeling of discomfort. It localizes disputes at the regional level and does not allow them all to reach the national top level where they would explode with greater ferocity. But when it started, since we were influenced very much by the British system, I mean, there are very few truly federal countries. A truly federal country would be USA, where there were pre-existing nations like Louisiana and Alaska and other places, which were either purchased or gave up their sovereignty to become part of the US. Almost 1/3 or 1/4 of USA were independent countries which gave the sovereignty up to come into the US Union. And therefore, that was a truly federal, bottom-up federation. India is a top-down federation where it's a union of states with few federating features. So the Australian jurist Kenneth Weir in the 50s and 60s called it quasi-federal, which meant basically unitary with a few federal features. The fascinating story is how that largely unitary system has, in operational reality, become, in fact, hugely more federal, which is why the attacks on federalism for the last few years should be treated as more alarming. In actual practice, there are 6 federating influences which have worked in the last 75 years to make India a much, much, much more federal system than our designers designed in the Constituent Assembly. The first of those 6 is, of course, linguistic federalism. And nobody knows it better than states like Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra. Those of us who have, and I was certainly very young then, and I don't know much about it, but many of you here would know about the language riots of the 60s. Well, good, bad, or indifferent, some 3-language formula, a lot of leeway to states, a much more accommodative stance on regional languages, contained them. And I don't know of any major disruptions. There have been, of course, aberrations on that issue from the 60s. But what is the creation of states on linguistic lines but a huge, huge advance of linguistic federalism? States reorganization on linguistic lines, you may have different views about it, but it is a huge amount of federalism in action, but linguistic federalism. And broadly, the language formulas we are using has stood the test of time. I am, of course, always intrigued, as a side comment on this subtopic about linguistic federalism, that the government of India must have spent crores or hundreds of crores to propagate Hindi. In Parliament also we get things parallelly in Hindi. I get all kinds of official reports. I've been chairman of many parliamentary committees. I get English and Hindi. But really, the actual effect of promotion of Hindi by those governmental initiatives has been very limited. And it has been coupled with many governments using it as a camouflage for forceful imposition. The moment you let go and you do not have forceful imposition, you have found Hindi flourishing. You'll be surprised, and one of the reasons I ascribe, my personal view, is the media explosion of the 80s and 90s in particular. The visual media explosion. The visual media with now 570 or 600 channels and all these media houses. People from all communities, all regions, where there is no imposition, there is no compulsion, there is no force, there is no overt act, go in a natural way. And in the old days before OB vans, we used to go with my South Indian friends, not only from Tamil Nadu, but from different states, who would speak in a very natural way when they wanted in English and Hindi, broken here and there, because it was in a natural, spontaneous way. That probably has done more for Hindi than all the imposition and all the official language reports which have come from official sources. The second federating influence in the last 60, 70 years has been vigorous judicial review. It is interesting that, of course, the biggest public enemy number one of federalism, Article 356, from 2000 till now, 20 years, would hardly have been used about 10, 12 times. I don't remember the exact figure. Now, it's not merely a case of more sensible governments. Every government in power at the center loves to have the deadly tool of 356, which is the most anti-federal provision seen by many people, although it may be considered necessary in the Constitution. But why in practice has this anti-federal provision been so diluted? Because of vigorous, prompt, and last mile remedial judicial review in the last 20 years. The cases of takeover of governments or toppling of governments or destabilizing of governments, and they not only relate to 356, but they relate to all forms of destabilization, which means defections, 356, inducements, and of course, other forms of attack contrary to the numbers. They've all met with prompt judicial action. Rameshwar took a few years, which is considered long. Ramakrishna Hegde won the Bommai case, but by then 3 governments had changed by the time the Bommai judgment came. But subsequent to that, Karnataka, Bihar, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Uttarakhand, second Karnataka, Goa, Arunachal Pradesh, in each of this, wherever, almost each one of them. And it is that which has reduced, significantly reduced, the over 100 exercises of 356 till 2000, followed by about 15 or 11 or 12 post-2000. Because the judiciary on this subject has walked the talk. A year is a short time compared to what the earlier judgments used to take. Had this judgment been decided within a few weeks, the Eknath Shinde matter, possibly some outcomes would have been different. But by and large, this is the very important salutary second federating influence, which has made operational India a more federal country, not designed constitutional India. The third, possibly the most important in numbers, is Panchayati Raj. I remember, because I was standing next to him when Rajiv Gandhi telephoned my father and said, Dr. Singhvi, you give long lectures on Panchayati Raj and you are considered a learned person in that subject. But everywhere around us, Panchayati Raj is lying in wreck and ruin. So I'm immediately appointing you the head of a committee for revitalization of Panchayati Raj. This is in the late 80s, 86 to be precise. My father's report came in the late 80s and led to the 92 amendment to the Constitution, which brought in this whole set of provisions from ZZ and ZQ and all that for municipalities and Panchayati Raj. But that is the most remarkable federating influence of the Indian Union. When I go as a member of parliament to my home state, Rajasthan, and now I'm from West Bengal, 50% of the time sitting opposite me is a woman who is the head of the panchayat or is the head of the local body. She's taking decision. There are 2 million women in positions of power, which was unthinkable some decades ago. Yes, there may be proxies in some cases still, but that's changing and changing fast. there is a huge amount, a silent revolution in our three-tiered system by which, at the end of the day, you have because another name for federalism is decentralization. And there cannot be a more humongous numbers decentralization than Panchayati Raj. The fourth has been economic liberalization, whether you call it the 1985 watershed, but certainly the 1991 watershed. Delicensing is itself a decentralization. And although delicensing much more needs to be done at the state levels, in the central level, today, there is automatic federalism of greatest degree because a cabinet minister in the central union government, who is the same rank as the chief minister, according to me, has only 1/3 as much power as a chief minister of a state. Everybody used to travel and fly to Delhi in those days. You don't need to. You can continue your entire industry for the lifetime of the industry without flying to Delhi, because Delhi has very limited powers today. If at all, more delicensing is required states. But economic liberalization has meant that there is a far greater devolution of power on the economic scene. The fifth is fiscal federalism. Again, probably the most important, because that's where the shoe pinches. For a long time, the maximum devolution to states, whether by way of grants or taxes sharing or whatever Finance Commission provides, etc., was ranging from 30 to 33%. It is now 43% plus and hopes to get to 45% soon over a period of 15-20 years. Ultimately, what matters is where the shoe pinches, where the money comes from. If devolution, irrespective of politics, and all of this has lots of drawbacks, I'm coming to that, but if that fiscal federalism is a great flag for federalism in general, compared to where we were when the Republic of India started. And the last, the sixth, possibly equally important as the other five, is regional parties. The cacophony, the chaos, which we in the drawing rooms of Delhi think of when we think of a regional party in so-and-so state, in so-and-so state. We want uniformity, we want discipline, we want singularity. Actually, the opposite is true. Federalism is flourishing because of regional parties across the length and breadth of India, and more of India is ruled by regional parties than by the 2 or 3 central parties. Much more territory of India and much more population of India is ruled by that. Now, you may like it or not, you may have philosophy A or B, but this is federalism. The point I'm making is, from a designed constitution which is unitary, our framers never imagined where we would be in 91, post-91, where regional parties started, and today in 2023, where we are. And therefore, as I said, dissent, discomfort, and dissatisfaction, the 3 Ds, are better managed without exploding always at the top of the pressure cooker, at regional, local levels, at panchayat levels, at state levels, etc. It quarantines conflicts, and that is the big gain of federalism. But as I said, none of my pillars are complete without going from the normative, which is what I've talked about till now, to the positive under each pillar. What should be, what is designed, from what actually is happening on the ground. Now, on the ground, as far as federalism is concerned, this particular dispensation in power in the central government has popularized 2 phrases. One phrase actually, with various facets. Cooperative federalism is the mantra, especially after 2014. Cooperative federalism, unfortunately, has remained and become more and more a mantra. The actual track record is fast becoming the exact opposite. Indian federalism is under strain on several fronts, on constitutional front, on economic front, on political front, and electoral front. To the extent that several chief ministers have said that this government at the center has converted cooperative federalism into combative federalism. The union government is locked in an unsavory confrontation with several states, and we regularly find examples are diverse and manifold. The Constituent Assembly debates, which are the best place to go to whenever you have time, or you are in a despairing mood, are replete with Baba Saheb's admonitions, and we celebrated his Divas just 2 days ago. Replete, saying, actually the Hindi phrase is more appropriate, Ek myan mein do talwar nahi. No two swords in one scabbard. That is the debate whenever they discuss governors. They said, we want a nominated governor because you do not want two swords in one scabbard, an elected chief minister and also an elected governor. The whole idea was to limit the gubernatorial office. And Ambedkar goes even further and says, I am scared because our design of the governor is so ornamental that I am worried that nobody will accept the post of governor. Because our design is intended to be deliberately and consciously ornamental. This was the basis of the constitutional equilibrium created by much wiser people than us in the Constituent Assembly led by Ambedkar. Let us cut to contemporary reality, especially of the last 9 years. And for those of you who haven't smelt the coffee, this is the time to smell the coffee. From Paschim Bengal to Kanyakumari, governors are on the war path. Many criticize, indeed condemn their own state governments, and usually on Twitter. Condemn. Many delay assent to bills passed with overwhelming majority by assemblies for months without explanation. Look at this fantastic irony. If I am the governor and I have the supreme right to reject the bill, I am told not to reject the bill. Because rejection means a legislative override can apply. So what better way than not to reject but keep it hanging like that mythological figure called Trishanku in suspended animation, neither on earth nor in the outer space. Ultimately, you know that you will have to pass it or it will be passed, whether by the courts or by you. But that time period which you gain is sufficient harassment to convert ek myan mein do talwar temporarily into two swords in one scabbard. Then again, devious and manipulative means and tactics are devised. Devious and manipulative means and tactics, I said, to send unwelcome guests to non-consensual hosts. Unwelcome guests are central government investigating agencies like CBI to non-consenting states. I am doing a series of such cases in the Supreme Court. I'll give you two examples, which should be more amusing than shocking, but they are both shocking and amusing. One of the, I'm talking obviously where I'm appearing for a non-consenting state, who is more than a non-consenting adult, who has never given consent for CBI to come. In the court, and the argument made still to be decided by the CBI or the central government for assuming jurisdiction in one case is that although the crime happened in that state, although all the elements of the crime happened in that state, it happened near or adjacent to or on no railway complainant, there is no damage to railways, nothing happened to railways. That crime happened to happen nearby and partly on railway property. Therefore, the central government has jurisdiction, therefore CBI can come in. A second very innovative example is that, yes, well before we, the CBI, registered a FIR, in CBI parlance it is called RC. They call an FIR into a regular case, RC. Well before we, the CBI, registered an RC, the consent which was historically existing had been withdrawn by the state government. Well before, months, years. But even before that withdrawal, in our own files, we had started a PE, which is a preliminary inquiry. So long as there's a preliminary inquiry on our files, and as you know in the CBI rules, the preliminary inquiry cannot get out. It's all internally, they are deciding whether to put a FIR, convert the PE into an RC. So the basis for jurisdiction to enter my home is that I had initiated a PE, you subsequently withdrew the consent. There was no FIR, no RC on that date, but I can come to your house and have dinner uninvited because I had a PE going beforehand. All these clever or too clever by half ideas are intended to convert local crimes into federal crimes. That's the constitutional principle we are talking about. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether I come to your state for one case or you go to another state. If everybody started doing this all over India, where is federalism? Why did you create Section 6 of the CBI Act? Saying that you can't enter her house unless she gives you consent. We have had, friends, governments of all political colors and hues for the last 75 years. All colors, including several BJP governments prior to this BJP government. But I do not think that there have been a more direct assault on federalism by any of those governments than what we have seen in the last few years. And I'd be less than candid and truthful if I did not say so. My third pillar of democracy, which is also, this is the first institutional pillar. The others were non-institutional till now. This is the first institutional, but my third pillar is parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary democracy is two words, not one. Parliament is one word, democracy is the other word. And therefore we realize that both words have to be built up, grown, advanced, not one word. In parliamentary democracy, it is the spirit which matters much more than the theory. It's not the building which matters. It's the essence of parliamentary democracy. I always say, and I'm now in my 17th year in Parliament, next year will be my 18th year, that the two ladies in Bangladesh can't sit together in their central hall. Ziaul Haq and Nawaz Sharif cannot sit together in the central hall of Pakistan. But the culture of the Indian Parliament is, at least was till some time ago, that everyone, and you would have a Rajnath Singh sitting here, you'd have Abhishek Singhvi sitting here, you'd have Arun Jaitley sitting there, you'd have a Sharad Pawar sitting here. And the other two rules were that it's the biggest gossip place in the world. You would say anything you like. Everything and anything you like and say is off the record unless I tell you to put it on the record. And all the senior journalists know that they will never violate it. They will ask you. Even the younger lot is told to be careful. Now that spirit of parliamentary democracy is something to be cherished and preserved and progressed and emulated and advanced. Unfortunately, things are going in the opposite direction. It is not possible to have that spirit if you have, along with that, trust deficit, if you have a climate of fear, if I am checking up every day on whom you are talking to and what you are talking. Therefore, this is the more amorphous part of it. The second is that even in Parliament, and we all understand politics needs optics, it needs certain things to be done for show rather than for substance. But there are parts of Parliament where that has never been true. Unfortunately, it is becoming true there also now. I have always believed, and I've been privileged to be chairman of 3 of the very important parliamentary standing committees. In 2011 of law, as was mentioned, in 2022 of home, and now in 23 of commerce, currently. It's been said in British Parliament hundreds of years ago, and in Indian Parliament also it has been true. Parliament at work is Parliament in committee, or Parliament in committee is Parliament at work. You'll be astonished at the degree of solid, real good work which can and is done in parliamentary committees, directly opposite of all the disruption you see in the House itself. I was privileged in that 2011 committee. At that time, we got one of the most controversial bills, Lokpal. I was the chair of that committee. Highly divisive. But the parliamentary committee gave a near unanimous report on 22 issues. I framed 25. On 3 issues, there was a minor dissent. That's the meaning of parliamentary committee. And when the proposal came before Hamid Ansari's rejection, I vigorously opposed the bringing of cameras into the committee. And then subsequently, Hamid Ansari also opposed that. Because the beginning of the end of solid, real good work would start if cameras were allowed into committee meetings. And happily, we do not have that rule yet. Because people understand that you have to be bipartisan to a large degree. You have to have convergence. You have to get above your political boundaries and do the work in terms of the nitty-gritty. Unfortunately, and I say it with a certain degree of personal experience because I have, as I said, chaired and I'm chairing 3 committees. That bipartisanship, even in parliamentary committees, which is of a very high order, is diminishing. It has to diminish when the members are told that you are ultimately agents of a party and you are not really members of a parliamentary committee. That, again, is a very sad change which I hope is arrested sooner rather than later. I have had suggestions about reform in Parliament. I think the rigor of the whip should be reduced. Creativity. What is the whip? The whip is required to prevent governments falling. It's completely understandable. If there is a money bill and people don't attend and vote according to the party view, the government will fall. Certainly you should have a whip for those things. But today a whip is stultifying and strangulating and gagging creativity. This is a reform we must experiment with. You must limit the whip to a few core issues where the government is not endangered. If you do that, the amount of creativity, originality and innovation of parliamentarians has to be seen to be believed in the House. But a lot of people cannot speak, cannot give their views, cannot be creative, cannot be out-of-the-box thinking, cannot think in a particular way because there is a general whip. That is one reform I think we should experiment with. It can be calibrated, it can be safeguarded. It did not at all affect the original purpose of the whip, which was to ensure that governments don't fall on trivial reasons. The other is also to consider a very clear specified standard and not these judicial pronouncements which decide when and who will be disqualified how. You know, different judgments have really created situations. Now I understand that in India, conviction is sometimes the closest to eternity. So you cannot say that a member of parliament, a representative of the people should be disqualified only after conviction, because conviction doesn't happen frequently or doesn't happen ever sometimes. But equally, you cannot start disqualifying people on stages much before conviction. So, and it doesn't matter which one you do, it's a matter of legislation, not judicial pronouncements, which becomes vague, ad hoc, episodic and case-wise. Why not have a simple line? That's the other reform I have always advocated. Whatever the line you draw, my own line would be that you will stand disqualified if A, charges are framed against you, not charge sheet is filed, but charges are framed against you by a competent court. B, those charges are framed qua certain specified offenses. The offenses must be specified, not anything and everything. And C, if you want, you can specify the period of time also, of punishment, etc. This would make it a more core, because there are all classes of political so-called crimes committed by politicians, and sometimes this power is being used in a completely trivialized and non-appropriate manner. But before I leave Parliament, let me again come back to the current situation. There is a far more important issue on parliamentary democracy than we tend to think about. I've talked about, as I said, the positive side, the institutional pillar of democracy and the origins and the reform in a theoretical sense. But let's look at practical. What is parliament? It's the temple of democracy. What is democracy? It is part of the basic structure, level playing field, free and fair elections. That's the heart of our democracy. So this institutional pillar is very important. But have we thought of the reality and what it is doing to this fundamental pillar of Indian democracy? Are we talking of a theoretical equality and not a real equality, as Marie Antoinette did, saying that if they don't have bread, let them eat cakes? That's also equality. But do we really have a level playing field in Parliament and for parliamentarians when, if a somewhat dated figure, and this figure is worse now, I don't have the latest figure, in 2019-20, the Association for Democratic Reform said that the BJP had received 2,600 crores from quote-unquote unknown sources. And 78%, this 2,600 crores, was 78% of the total receipts of 7 other national parties. But a different statistic is even more telling. This great grand innovation of electoral bonds, 2018 to 22, 4 years, the BJP has received more than 50% of all electoral bonds. The next party in sequence has received 10%, so 50 to 10. The third party, the TMC of Bengal, has received 8%. The question is not how much you received. The question is, what is happening to a level playing field when you are having a theoretical equality, one man, one vote, one seat, one man. But is that a theoretical equality like cakes and bread, or is it a real equality? Consequent to this, of course, are all the other things. Let's turn to advertising. The BJP, the ruling party, has been found by BARC to be the biggest advertiser in the last 5 years. In a particular week, they test this by weekly insertions. In a particular week in November 2018, they've had 22,000 plus insertions. That is the number of times an advertisement is aired on TV, which is twice the number which the biggest advertiser in the country has ever done, Netflix. Netflix has done 11,000 at the highest. This has done 22,000. This is for the week of 12th to 16th November 2018. It is spending about $140 million on publicity per year, with 43% of this expenditure on print ads. This I have lots, one can go on statistics, they're a little dated in fact, you can have more statistics. The vital constitutional question I raise is, if basic structure theory postulates a level playing field and is considered essential for democracy, then opaque structures like electoral bonds have been by the ruling party, either at the center or in opposition in the states. Consequently, courts have to determine this yesterday, the validity of these bonds yesterday, whereas actually we are having it languishing for over 5 years. Another facet of parliamentary democracy before I move on to the next pillar. I have only heard once or twice in any parliamentary democratic system that the ruling party officially states that we will not allow parliament to function unless a leading member of the opposition first apologizes. Mark the two parts of this sentence. I, the ruling party, will not allow parliament to function. The second part of the sentence is, unless you prior apologize. Now, I have never, if you actually analyze this sentence, it is amazing that it's happening in India for the last several months. This is apart from the fact that you can sue him for defamation, you can send him for jail for sedition, you can call him anti-national. But you cannot allow parliament to function and you can't be allowed to speak, Mr. So-and-so, in this case Rahul Gandhi, unless you give a prior apology. How, of what principle of parliamentary democracy can this be justified? There's another batch of persons, and I'll not say much because I'm also in the Privileges Committee. That batch of persons has either received privilege notices, and in one case a lady has been suspended beyond the completion of the last session. Suspension beyond the session is rare. The lady in question accepted that inadvertently she had filmed and apologized unconditionally and profusely. So at the worst, in the session which ended 2 weeks ago, her suspension should have, or her reference to privileges should have ended. But the suspension is continuing on the ground on the stated reason that they are now trying to find out who uploaded it or under whose instructions. When the actual act of culpability, the filming, has been accepted, adopted, and apologized for. In any case, the larger issue in all this related to parliamentary democracy, which I hold to be the most cherished value, is forgotten. And that larger issue is cooperation, consensus, cordiality. They all appear to be words of a bygone era. Magnanimity seems an alien word. Ego, arrogance, and confrontation based on numbers, on majorities, have taken their place. As I said, there are precedents of the same ruling party in power at the center where the spirit of parliamentary democracy was understood very, very, very differently. I turn now to judiciary. I did say I'll take long, but I'll take a little bit more time because I'm going to speed up, but it'll take a little bit of more time. The next, this, as I told you, is the job of a fan dancer. The topic is so large. I'm only touching upon the organs and then leaving it, but I need to touch upon these institutional pillars. The next is judiciary, which of course, as you know, is the most remarkable, the one most trusted by our system, the one with the highest trust quotient, and with avant-garde doctrines of judicial review matched by no other judicial institution on planet Earth. You know, Marbury Madison came in the 18th century early in USA, and they were exulting and dancing with joy about judicial review in Marbury Madison in the US Supreme Court. If you see the judicial review powers of the Indian Supreme Court, not now but for the last 25, 30 years, it would make 20 Marbury Madisons blush. There is no comparison. It's the most powerful court. It has, as I said, created doctrines like the basic structure, which says even a constitutional amendment can be unconstitutional. It has progressed a whole new jurisprudence of PILs, now almost 30 years old, etc., etc. The two scourges of this institutional pillar of Indian democracy, one is arrears, which makes us hang our head in shame when on the one hand you have basic structure, you have PIL, you have all these doctrines, on the other hand you have these humongous arrears. Palkiwala always believed that words must be an assault on the senses. For reform to happen, you need to have an assault on the senses, even though people might not like to hear them. So he said, the pace of disposal of cases in India would be considered unduly slow in a community of snails. He then added that if litigation were added in the Olympics as a sport, India would win a gold medal every year. He further added that the closest interaction with eternity, which anybody can ever have while living, is to be part of a litigation. Now, these are harsh words. In current context, they may even, Palkiwala might even have been hauled off for being anti-national. But they are true, and they must, and the comparator, because we are told Supreme Court has done so many, Supreme Court is doing marvelous work actually, with so many things. Their arrears are a total of 65, 70,000. The real problem is our 22, 23 high courts, and the much bigger problem is our district judiciary, wrongly called the subordinate judiciary. With all the lectures, with all the sermons, with all the seminars, with all the functions, with all the tears and congratulatory pats on the back, our arrears has risen just immediately pre-COVID at about 3 point something crores, just over 3 crores, to 4.25 crores. We've actually had a 1.25 crore net increase of pendency, as if 3 crores was already not dismal enough. Of those 3 crores at that time, 2.5 crores were in the district judiciary, 50 odd lakhs in the high courts put together, and 65 odd thousand, less than a lakh, less than 75 in the Supreme Court. Most of this has again happened in both the high courts and the district judiciary. The reasons are well known, and we keep on having seminars and discussions, but we're not able to address them. After 10 years of beating a stick the Supreme Court has increased the judge per million population ratio from 10 per million, 10 judges per million or 11 judges per million. It has crawled after 12 years of constant judicial mandamuses to 20 per million. The minimum ideal is supposed to be either 50 per million or at least 35, 40 per million. It is like saying that you have excellent hospitals with the latest equipment but no doctors. I don't understand how patients will be treated. There are so many other reasons. In the zeal to be seen as pro-public, we create laws like 138 and 498A. Parliament has now turned full circle and it is considering how to modify those same laws because they found that the two biggest pendencies, and here you have very eminent criminal people sitting here, criminal law people, and there they will tell you that the numbers in those two sections alone are constituting the bulk of the criminal law pendency. There are any number of cases in the Supreme Court which go to a division bench, which is 2 judges, and are referred to 3 judges. And they have to be referred first to 3 judges where reference is required. And then they're referred to 5 judges. You can't refer 2 to 5 directly, and sometimes to 7. But the beauty of it is that the period taken to refer from 2 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, which is about 4 years or 3 years or 5 years, in between spawns hundreds of high court judgments. The poor high court judge is not quite sure whether he should follow the 2-judge bench or the reference or the further reference, and it spawns litigation, and by the time the 5-judge order comes, 5-judge bench order comes, all of those hundreds of cases in the high courts have to be reversed. These are practical but real issues of pendency. As has been put more cynically but more emphatically in the Hindi proverb, दोपहर तक बिक गया बाजार का हर झूठ, दोपहर तक बिक गया बाजार का हर झूठ, और मैं एक सच को लेकर शाम तक बैठा रहा. This is unfortunately the sight of the litigant sitting stoically before the court for justice. Barring now, and I've been writing on this for a long, long time, and I was privileged to find that one of my articles on arrears and what I call reforms in the administration of justice has been cited in a very important judgment on this subject by Justice Kaul. Now, for the first time, they have woken up to the idea of using Article 224A, an article of the Constitution amended decades ago in the 60s, but never, I think, to my knowledge, used in any high court, maybe once or twice in 50 years. Used in the Supreme Court 4 or 5 times, namely appointing ad hoc judges. When you are taking time and politics is taking over and you're not able to appoint judges, you have a provision for ad hoc judges who can deal with the backlog in some better way. But friends, again, the reality of the judiciary of course has had periods of threat, frequently more from within and less from without. But the current government sniping at the judicial institution appears to be continuous, strategic, organized, and calibrated. It has all the characteristics of an organized image assassination assault. And ironically, it is by no less than the central government. I don't think we can avoid stating clearly that it has full approbation and sponsorship at the highest quarters. One day, a particular constitutional authority questions the basic structure doctrine itself. Something now, Keshwaran Bharati was, so now 50 years old, 74 to now. A constitutional authority questions the necessity, existence, need, efficacy of that. The next day, no less than the law minister considers that either he should be able to sit on the collegium or the collegium should be abolished. A third day, the same constitutional functionary suggests obliquely that a certain class of retired Supreme Court judges are a threat to the nation or well-being or governance, and so on and so forth. It is quite astonishing that this kind of thinking by persons who have no stake and are not part of the legal ecosystem is happening day in, day out. Because for all the warts and all the shortcomings and all the negatives which I myself itemized, the judiciary cannot be chipped away at day in and day out by constitutional functionaries. It is something where I believe that those who believe in control freak approaches are finding that there is one institution where they are not able to exercise full control freakism. And therefore, some of this sniping has increased in intensity and focus. Consequently, the pushback from civil society, from all other parts of India, have to be equally organized, synergical, and thought out, because unfortunately, and this is my own view, this is a bastion which the government is eyeing avariciously. Of course, there is no doubt that the judiciary also has to introspect. Nobody is suggesting it doesn't. The judiciary has to examine its image and ask itself that is it always justifying the, I would call it, excessive trust placed by the citizenry in the judiciary. For that, the judiciary has to walk the talk and to give last mile relief. It is not enough to sermonize or lament or to turn back after going 3/4 of the way, but not giving effective relief. Take, for example, the second-time recommendations of judges to the High Court, which have been returned once. We have heard this for the last 5-7 years. What's the point of lamenting again and again? What's the point of sermonizing? What's the point of threatening? And one former Chief Justice cried from a podium like this about it, actually cried. I have written then and earlier that if in one case, on a return or delay of a second reiterated recommendation, a notice of contempt is issued, not to the constitutional functionary in the first place, but to the law secretary, you will possibly find this stopping. But if you substitute the contempt notice, because it is clear as crystal clear that unless those judgments are overruled, the jurisdiction to act on a second returned reiterated recommendation is zero. There is no power. But if you substitute, for whatever reason, contempt notice by lament, sermon, or helplessness, then you are not going to cure this. That is what I mean, that you have to have last mile connectivity if you have a principle which has to be implemented. Second, and similarly, the judiciary, and it doesn't matter which way they decide in your favor, they decide in my favor, that is not the point. They have to decide matters of burning moment pending with them. Avoidance is also a decision. Default is also a decision. Delay is also a decision. But these are not three forms of decision making for which the citizenry of this country has excessive faith in you. And the more such cases grow, and one of them I've just talked about, a 5-year delay in deciding electoral bonds issue, without which directly impinges on basic structure. For that matter, deciding, again, this way or that way doesn't matter, whether you can convert a state, a pre-existing state, into a union territory, or indeed citizenship issues, or indeed other level playing field issues. A decision is where things will be set right, and a delay or an avoidance or a non-decision or a pendency is where suspicion, fear, and deprecation will happen. As I leave the judiciary, I must regretfully add something which I saw, heard, and yesterday, as late as yesterday. The courts, according to me, have to necessarily stand up for liberty, for progressive and liberal values, for protection of the core values of our polity. If the judiciary has to do that, then consider what happened yesterday. In James Bond terms, as they said, first time is happenstance, second time is coincidence, third time is enemy action. That's one of the famous James Bond films. I don't know, it's Goldfinger or one of those films. Now, is it coincidence, happenstance, or is it enemy action that 4 of the accused in a particular murder of Mr. Pal have already been liquidated? 2 more, including a son, was liquidated 2 days ago. And 2 more, including a father, were liquidated yesterday. Of course, all this is done without charges being framed, without trial, forget conviction. And let me tell you, I am a relative conservative regarding criminal matters. I believe such persons should be hanged if they are guilty. I genuinely believe that. And I have not opposed the death penalty because I believe bad crimes, really bad crimes, do deserve the death penalty. But can they be hanged by elimination while talking to a video with policemen surrounding them intended to protect them? Is this the idea of India on which a sitting minister of the UP government yesterday says, कई चीज़ों का हिसाब इसी जन्म में पूरा हो जाता है. You all understand enough Hindi to understand what I'm saying. Many accounts are closed in the same life on earth. Is this the concept of rule of law, because I'm now talking of judiciary, which we can have in a country like India, where the chief minister of a state larger than Europe exults in this kind of liquidation? We of course have all kinds of stories now. You can say that somebody in the crowd like you picked up a gun and shot me. Some desperate victim's family shot me. Some XYZ gangster shot me. That all will hone by inquiry. But it is not possible to believe that 8 people involved as accused or co-accused in the murder of this trial, not faced conviction, not faced charge sheets in many cases, and have been liquidated in the midst of those people who are there to actually protect them. This is where the judiciary's entire existence, according to me, is tested, because if rule of law and faith in the rule of law dies, then all these grand institutional pillars of democracy I'm talking about are nothing but words. Friends, I have 2 more and I'm done. I'm very sorry, but this is a big topic. I'll take a few more minutes. The next is, of course, media, the other great institutional pillar of Indian democracy. Now, some of the harsh words I'm about to use are fully justified but restricted to certain sections of the media. Don't get me wrong. Fortunately, this country is alive and kicking because there are large sections of the media which don't fall under my criticism, fortunately. But today, it is important for me to say something which I never thought would be necessary to say. It would be obvious to any journalist verse to say, he doesn't need to go to the school of my friend here. Doesn't have to be a trained journalist to know this. That you cannot be a spokesperson of ideologies. You cannot be a person acting for vested interests or authorities. You cannot allow direct political conflict to affect your views. You cannot become a participant from an anchor. I don't think you require rocket science or attending a school or diploma course to know all this. All of you have practiced it for so many decades. But today, we have reached the stage where we have to repeat these things, these elementary principles. The media, large sections of it, and in particular visual, has become much, much more sensationalism and much, much less sense. Less sense, more sensationalism. They've become judge, jury, prosecutor, executioner, executor. With, and this is again a dated figure, I think is much more now, with 515 TV channels, with 500 million at peak time viewers, probably 600 million now. Imagine the effect you are having on free speech, fair speech, level playing field, if you have this kind of approach. The biggest culprit in an institutional sense is this miracle, which many of you know about, but which is continuing merrily without any solution. this miracle called TRP. The TRP, something so obviously a fraud, is flourishing. And people don't realize that the TRP ultimately determines content. Because those 35, 40,000 meters for a country the size of India, 125 crores, I've always said, people deserve a Nobel Prize for miniaturization. For a 125 crore country, you measure viewership patterns by some 40,000 meters. If that is not a Nobel Prize for miniaturization, what is? But the TRP ultimately is not by itself bad. It leads to content decisions. Because what the TRP shows is what you will produce in content. Because content in turn decides the advertisements, or the advertisement in turn starts deciding the content. What does it ultimately lead to? It leads to a toxic triangle of revenue, of fake viewership patterns, and of content. To this toxic triangle, if you add liberal doses of politics, of glamour, of premeditated and motivated stands of journalists, insidious government control, ambitious anchors, people baying for the blood, then what more heady cocktail can you get? A cocktail which would put a mix of rum, vodka, and any other form of alcohol to shame. This is actually the truth, at least to the visual media, to a large extent. And we seem to be able to do nothing about it. We did not have the phrase called Godi media, at least when I started in this game in the media. But I only rightly hear Godi media for large sections. And I find no error in 90% of that characterization, so that I can call it a mischaracterization. No. It certainly wasn't true when I started in the pre-OB van days. The Press Council of India is another miracle. A toothless tiger, actually worse than a toothless tiger, because a toothless tiger at least roars. The PCI can do nothing as far as the print is concerned. It only continues with a incestuous conspiratorial silence. So friends, of course the sub judice rule died long ago. There is no such thing as a sub judice rule. The real point about the media is that either we have to address the issue, because another fundamental level playing field, or what makes for a level playing field of democracy itself, is the media. It's not called the fourth estate for nothing. It is given the status alongside the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, because it directly affects democracy. Either you have to have the guts to bring in things like a broadcasting bill. Broadcasting bill, incidentally, is the longest pending bill, one of the longest pending bills in Parliament. It clarifies conflicts of interests. Or you have to make demarcations. You have to make Chinese walls between ownership, between interest, between how you run it. There are drafts available, but nobody has the guts to pass them. Freedom House, which must be most maligned, puts India 2 on a 4-point scale for free and independent media under the present dispensation. In 2020, people tend to forget because our institutional memory is short, several journalists were jailed for being critical of the Government of India's and the Prime Minister's policy on the second wave, a period now forgotten and consigned to the dustbin. We are all supposed to believe that the raids on the BBC happened because of a past inquiry ongoing, as if all of us eat grass. All platform providers now face clear withdrawal of the exemption for safe harbor. If an external government body decides that you should take off fake news and you don't take it off, whether it is fake news or not is a decision by external elements. Today, we have the strange spectacle that on the one hand, you have a whole class of journalists, and especially in the visual media, who depend, survive, and flourish only on handouts of the government. You have a similar class which asks the most amusing, fawning, and friendly questions to government ministers with no cross-examination, no follow-up, no intrusiveness. It frequently looks like the worst form of Noora Kushti invented, but that passes off for press freedom, for media independence. These are harsh words, but as Palkiwala said, words have to be assault on the senses for reform to follow. And I believe that this is far too valuable an organ, which is now completely under subordination, large sections of it, which is now completely under a climate of fear, etc. The last two institutional bodies are, in fact, the last three, I can take them together, are the Election Commission, the CAG, and the Army. I only want to say that the Election Commission generally, again, is India's pride. It's the world's envy. It's a fantastic organization doing this remarkable logistics work with millions of people voting in elections. They are frequently consulted, and I told a former chief election commissioner that if you could charge consultancy fees, you'd be the most employed, because every country wants to hire our election commission to conduct their elections. But we have to guard against politicization of this body, irrespective of the political color at the center. I'll give you two examples where unfortunately that standard has not been met, but still there is time, and the recent judgment of the Supreme Court deserves accolade for making at least a step in that direction, namely the selection process being more independent and more inclusive. The two examples I wanted to give you was in 2019 general elections. I was in particular looking at the Election Commission, and there were about 30 to 40 complaints at a higher level about misuse of the Model Code of Conduct violation. And I led some delegations to complain. And actually in 30 of those complaints we made, in more than 70% prompt action was taken, which is either to stop or to say there is nothing wrong, or otherwise to say that you are not barred from campaigning for 2 or 3 days. You remember that Model Code of Conduct, everything is all about speed, because the window is 6 weeks. There's no point punishing you afterwards, because if you can campaign during that time, then you've got away with your wrongdoing. 10 of those 35-40 complaints related to the Prime Minister and the Home Minister. In those 10 complaints, there was simply no decision for 4 of those 6 weeks, which is the window for the 2019 elections. In the last 2 weeks, we approached the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has to follow a procedure, notice this, that, other. A direction was given. And 1 week left, the matters were taken up. They were ultimately dismissed in most cases against us with a dissent. This footnote is very interesting. There was a 2-1 order in these 5-7 cases involving the Prime Minister and the Home Minister. The 2-1 order, first, the dissent was not made available, and a letter was issued saying the practice of the Election Commission is not to share dissents with you. That's how a very good Election Commission episode ended, with 2 exceptions of the 9th schedule, the Prime Minister and the Home Minister. What happened after that is a nice footnote also. 3 to 4 months later, that dissenting member started having reports against him in several newspapers. We all know the name, you all know the person. He was then subject to several reopened inquiries by 2 central agencies. And ultimately, a person who would have become CEC and had 2 years left was made to look as if he had opted for an Asian Development Bank job at Manila, where he still continues. He had still time left in the EC, and he would become the Chief Election Commissioner. This is where you have to guard against. I'm giving you live examples because the institution is there. our 323, 324, the powers are very large in our constitution. By and large, it's done good work. But when push comes to shove, which is the example I gave you, you have to show, as I said, vitamin G, which is guts. Of course, the army is our most cherished institution. Its strength is its anonymity. Its strength is anonymity. You don't think of the army when you talk in India. You don't think of the army when you think in UK. As long as you keep it that way, it is good. If ever once they taste blood, it is the beginning of the end of democracy. So please don't politicize our army. Any politicization by Rambo statements, by jingoistic chest thumping, by making it appear as if my promotion to Chief of Army Staff or Chief of all the three forces depends on how jingoistic I sound, will all be the beginning of the end of this cherished institution, because anonymity, rock solid behind us, is the whole strength of the army. That has been the tradition of India, and we have to keep it that way. I'm only sounding a note of caution and fear, but I think it's an important guideline. Well, friends, I've actually come to the last 2 points, and this is not a lawyer's promise, it's an actual promise. Before I come to the actual conclusion, let me make the penultimate point, which I have put here under the heading fear. As I near the end of this lecture, I'd be failing in my duty if I did not mention that fear is antithetical to democracy. It is decimative of rule of law. It is destructive of each of the many institutional or non-institutional pillars which I have talked about. The true test of any ruling dispensation, is not how much GDP it has increased, but how much, even marginally, GDF it has decreased. Gross domestic fear. That is really a measure of its success. Sadly, this indicator, instead of decreasing, seems to be continuously on the rise in the last 9 years. GDF. And it is directly antithetical to that poem by the great man, the bearded man, who gave the title of Mahatma to Gandhi. Which kind of India did he expect us to awaken in that famous Nobel-winning Gitanjali? What you are seeing is the antithesis. And what is that antithesis? Dossier Raj, micromanagement, daily misuse of agencies, eavesdropping, control of content, sedition charges, defamation suits, citizens moving from mobile calls to WhatsApp calls to FaceTime calls, Raid Raj, privacy intrusion, death or bodily harm threats successfully carried out for what you speak, what you write, what you eat, what you wear, what you think, how you communicate. The list is endless, friends. How can democracy, how can our pillars of democracy, institutional or non-institutional, coexist in this all-pervasive clutch Tagore imagined? Well, friends, I have now come to the end. I confess, despite the length of this speech, done no more than the job of a fan dancer. A fan dancer draws attention to the subject without really covering the subject. Each of my pillars is enough for a separate lecture by itself. Personally, I believe that India's amazing diversity is its best insurance against degeneration of democracy or institutionalization of dictatorship. The intrinsic nature of India and Indians is argumentative, is diverse, is not conformist, is anti-uniformity. And that is also our strength. Our democracy and Gandhi's vision of that democracy still has many miles to walk. It has many promises to keep. It, of course, can be and should be castigated as an imperfect democracy. But equally, it has to be lauded for the remarkable achievements which we, being the only country of those 30, 40 countries emerging from the yoke of imperialism, have managed to inaugurate. All our founding fathers, including Gandhi, would be both happy and sad. Of course, Gandhi is an extreme example because in 48 itself, he felt that there should be a winding up petition for all political parties. In 1948 itself, he wrote that all political parties should be wound up. As I said, he was an over-idealistic person. But despite all roadblocks, all various deviations, objections, obstructions, despite feeling that you are sometimes in a minority of one, Gandhi needs to be emulated because he would never have stopped nudging, pushing to make the India of our dreams. Gandhi would have picked up the phrase from the man who conferred the title of Mahatma on him, Ekla Chalo, by Tagore. He would have either cited Ekla Chalo, do your thing, or he would have picked up Iqbal's words, मैं अकेला ही चला था, जानिबे मंजिल, लोग आते रहे और कारवां आता रहा. Even though I was the sole person, I kept walking. People kept joining, and we ultimately had a multitude, a caravan. Gandhi teaches us that you have to persist tenaciously and doggedly before reform takes place. In fact, it was he who said that all reform processes must pass the tortuous path of 5 stages. And it's the 5th stage till which you have to persist. First, indifference. Second, ridicule. Third, abuse. 4th, repression. And finally, 5th, respect. Therefore, friends, there is no better way than to persist on that path, despite the obstacles, despite the feeling of despair, despite the likelihood that you feel that you will never reach the end of the road, because ultimately, he can't be wrong. And the values which this democracy stands for cannot be wrong. Thank you very much indeed. My apologies for a very long lecture. No, I'm okay. It's perfectly all right. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So, I don't want to waste my time on all these federal subjects, everything. Many of the questions were asked. Many of the questions were answered, sir. Many of the questions were answered. And we, sir, I assure you, we have come from the country. What Anna said, we have come from a country, now part of India. We will not fear, sir. On behalf of all the lawyers over here, we say, we will not fear. Now I call upon Mr. Shashi Kumar to co-chair and also to interact with the chief guest. And before that, I will, we may take questions. We may take questions if any of the judges or the lawyers or any of the students have any questions, or they have to raise some few questions. I think that we can have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the outset, let me also add my note of commemorative note to Rakesh, whom we remember today, and to Mr. Ilango, who is a lawyer and a parliamentarian, who with the fortitude that we've seen, transformed a personal grief into such a strong public statement year after year after year on issues that concern us, impinging issues that concern us. We've just had a magisterial sweep, and one expected no less from ABISHEIK Manu Singhvi, who is certainly not just one of our top-notch advocates, because he's certainly there in the elite group, if you like, but we know him also because of the public interest causes it takes up. And today, more than ever, lawyers like him, like many in this audience, have become somehow a lifeline for the average citizen, for the normal citizen, to reassert what we thought were rights we could take for granted in a democracy like India. Whether it's in terms of the fundamental rights guaranteed to us in our Constitution, or the rights that we as citizens, as human beings, with the right to live with dignity, right to life, life to live honorably. All of members that in the run-up to independence, all the leaders of our independence movement were, with some exceptions, either lawyers or journalists or both. And we are now at a pass, I believe, where again, the task cut out for them, not an unenviable task in some sense, but a dharma, as it were, to fight the forces that I think we are faced with day in and day out. When Mr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi's theme was brought to me, I thought he would be speaking about a classical definition of, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and by extension, the fourth estate or the media, and these as the pillars of democracy and the checks and balances that they bring into play, which safeguard democracy, act as a kind of invigilation of democracy. But we've had a far more detailed institutional and non-institutional chronicling of democratic forces, of the pillars of our democratic forces. I just raised some issues which came to mind. Not on all of these, the judiciary, for instance. It seems to be gaining ground in the popular mind that while the judiciary, of course, is, shall we say, the court of last resort in every sense of the term for us, particularly the Supreme Court, in our current situation, is there a sense of, in a lighter vein, some distributive justice of the wrong variety being meted out there? Obiter pronouncements and judgments, don't seem to match sometimes. The obiter, Mr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi spoke about walking the talk again and again. The obiter pronouncements seem to walk, be the talk, but the walking seems to sometimes fall short of the expectations it raises. Or is that the process? Because the optics in terms of those observations. So is there a kind of mismatch? Or is it a case of going soft on hard issues and going hard on soft issues, as some people uncharitably try to characterize it? A sense of giving the state a favorable judgment and then not giving the state. I know I'm simplifying it, but is there a sense of some kind of distributive justice in inverted commas that operates here? We are also hearing far more scary things about, what is happening. We have an aggrandizing state, of that there is no doubt. And one of the objects of the aggrandizing state seems to be to pack the judiciary as it suits that state. We had seen that in one phase of aberration in our country, but that was at least manifest and open. And we knew how it was working during the emergency in '75 and so on. But now this seems far more insidious, far more between the lines, and we see also pronouncements by judges, not just in court, but also in social situations, which, as one legal scholar has gone to the extent of characterizing it as a move towards what one would call a move towards a religious orientation, rather than a constitutionalist kind of judgment. So is there a shift that is taking place, which obviously would be of great concern to our secular fabric, in terms of a section of the judiciary, if you like, which is looking at quoting Shastras and our traditional textbooks, which have nothing to do with perhaps jurisprudence scientifically as we understand it. And that's a new kind of issue that seems to, that we are concerned with. I'll just raise one or two other issues, and then perhaps Mr. Singhvi could address ones which he thinks are worth addressing. The media, we spoke about the media. Oh, one by one, okay.
Yeah, okay. Now, 3 points you made are about so-called obiter, packing the judiciary, and the religious orientation. Let me take them one by one. By obiter, perhaps you mean two things. Obiter is a term of art. It's a technical term. I don't think you mean that. Obiter is that part of the judgment which is not strictly necessary to decide the issue, but is written sometimes briefly, sometimes at length inside a judgment in writing. So dealing with X, in the course of X, there is a elaboration of Y. And X is directly arising in the fight between A and B, and therefore is necessary for the decision, which is why it's called a ratio decidendi. And the elaboration on the side is not strictly necessary. In other words, you could have decided the main part without saying that. That is the real meaning of obiter. I don't think you meant that. Because as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, unless it is something totally unconnected with the case, even an obiter would be treated as binding by the lower courts. So obiter has great weight because it comes from the Supreme Court and it's under 141, 142. That's the legal answer to your question. But I think what you meant was the other kind of obiter, the oral observations which people make when sitting in court, which is now, first of all, I mean, the practical answer is, I once, 20 years ago, see, I'll give you the judges ever. 50% of this will stop. So that's the second answer to your question.
Yes.
Sometimes, and we are all humans, I'm not blaming anybody, you have to show your interest. You may, in a particular case, play to the galleries. In a particular case, you may be genuinely interested. But it happens because post-1990, if you sneeze, the media is entitled to pick it up. And therefore, that explosion is one of the reasons. Third, it has no relevance to judging. The judges are absolutely not bound by what they say, but it is a salutary principle that the judges pre-90 did not speak more than was necessary off the cuff. However, one other part is the media's fault. When judges do, in the course of hearing, grill one side, which I think is the most important part of adversarial litigation. Devil's advocate, first when you get up and argue, I'm equally harsh or at least intrusive to you. Later on, Elango gets up and argues, I am entitled to be as harsh to him to get the best out of both. That's our adversarial system. The media tends to misreport, distort that. It says, Justice Singhvi demolished this guy by this question. Justice Singhvi is likely to ask the same question to Elango after a few minutes. So that is a lack of understanding on the media side. That's the fourfold answer to your question. Of course, it is true that judges are after all human beings, the overall climate affects them, and that's the fifth and the most important and the last answer to your question. They function in a context, in a climate. So, you see, there are only about 10, or I would say even lesser than 10% cases where push comes to shove in terms of very great sensitivity. There, your mettle is tested, and I would say many judges may not pass the test. We're all human beings. But in 75% cases, there are bilateral disputes or easily solvable legal disputes. You are entitled to acquit yourself very creditably. So, it's a mixed answer to your question. It's not as bad as you might think. But yes, if you are saying that you can close your eyes and blindly trust all judges in all cases, including the last 10% percentile, then obviously my answer would be no. That would be too idealistic and too unreal. Your second question, packing the judiciary, I don't think the word packing is appropriate. Certainly, this government has been the most control-freak sarkar ever invented by mankind in India or abroad. There's no doubt about that. Whether parliamentary democracy, non-parliamentary democracy, control-freak sarkar is the appropriate term for the central government. Now, control freaks by definition means that the PMO will control its own ministries. It is not only control freak external to you. The PMO controls every ministry. I don't want to waste time elaborating, but people who know how the PMO is today structured will start laughing at the Haksar PMO and the Mathai PMO and the Dhar PMO and the PC Alexander PMO. Today, the PMO is structured totally differently, but exercises minute, micro, 99.9% decision-making power over each ministry. Now, if you are doing this in a system, because that's your system of governance, then necessarily you have to do it in the next level, which is controlling the bureaucracy. Incidentally, a country of the size of 125 crores in India, according to me, can be reasonably well managed by having strategically and well-placed 40 joint secretaries. 40 joint secretaries can control the stream frame of the bureaucracy, not the secretary, the joint secretary. So that is the other aspect of control-free Sarkar. A third is control all of the forms where you have a majority anyway, the legislature, parliamentary committees. If these 3 or 4 examples are there, then why do you assume that they will not want to, I'm talking the desire, control the other organ of governance? Why should there be a sudden line drawn? It is but natural. It depends on your philosophy. There are other earlier BJP governments which may not have had that philosophy, and there was certainly a Nehruvian approach which did not have that degree. There has always been a degree. Everybody wants to control, but not that degree. So I think the answer to your second question is, yes, there is an approach, there is an attempt to influence and control. That is, after all, the basis of statements coming like abolish basic structure doctrine, have me on the collegium, have a representative of the government. That is the same thing. But the judiciary in many cases is resisting it. It should possibly resist it more in a united, synergical fashion. And once the message is clear, it will stop. It's a no-go area. Your third question is about religious orientation. I think this government's religious orientation is well known across the board. Nobody has to talk about it. Now, to which nook, crevice and cranny you can fit that religious orientation depends on a matter of detail. I wouldn't like to generalize but certainly the religious orientation, the intent behind that, and the general philosophy of life which sees things in a uniform color, given the chance, would apply to every organ, given the chance.
Right. If I might just another, is there a kind of war of attrition going on with the facade of the NGAC versus collegium, the merits and demerits of that, where increasingly now we are saying that collegium may not be perfect, but in the current situation, that's probably better than NGAC. Is there a war of attrition from the kind of comments we've seen, including from the law minister, where judges are under siege in some sense?
It's a direct war. It's not an attrition war or a camouflaged war anymore.
So pulling your punch,
Let me explain this. This is rather interesting, actually. It'll take 2 minutes. I happened to be privileged to be the opening speaker when the NJC was brought in. I led the debate. And as people said, in this divided polity, where we cannot agree on a normal statute, we are highly divided in both houses, the NJAC was passed with 100% votes with not a single dissent in the Lok Sabha. It was passed with the same 100% minus 1. Ram Jethmalani absented himself. Everybody else voted in our house also.
Right.
And I led the debate. Now the great grand achievement of this government is to convert 100% unanimity into a total opposition. That's been an achievement of this government. Opposition, why? Because the last 9 years have shown that even giving possibly a virtuous or a partially virtuous thing in your hand, if you are a dangerous fellow, you can make anything out of it. It's like nuclear power, depending on whose hand it is. So nuclear power, which can do a lot of good, but given in the hands of XYZ, can be disastrous, which is the basis for the opposition today. While the same people, the same political class. Number two, this so-called war, by the way, war requires 2 hands, 2 people to fight. The other side is not really fighting. They're only quietly resisting the judiciary. But the war of attrition is more like a attempt to get representation or to dilute or to snipe every day, to make statements every day, to create a climate. All this is done without bringing a bill to Parliament. Right. It's very simple. We are entitled to bring a bill to Parliament, and the bill will have to satisfy the basic test of law, which all lawyers know, that you have to overturn a judgment. You can't overturn a judgment. A bill can't be passed saying, I overturn X versus Y. It has to remove the basis of that judgment. So the bill will come, the bill will have a basis for removing the basis of the earlier judgment. Parliament will examine it, pass it, and then we'll see what the judiciary does. You don't do any of that. You snipe day in and day out. Now, why do you do it? Obviously, into submission or create a climate where there will be a consensus to do something. Both of which are united, the non-NDA opposition class, against it.
Right. Thank you. just move on to the other part with media, and I think you were justifiably right. You said that the media is a double-edged weapon in our current context. A section of the media has lain itself supine before the dispensation of the day for all kinds of wrong reasons. And I don't think any of us in the media fraternity who believe journalism is, if you can say democracy in one breath, you must be able to say a free and independent media in the next breath. That kind of journalism is important, would subscribe to that. In fact, I have no hesitation in saying that a section of the media is in fact not part of the fourth estate, but a fifth column of democracy, because it's eroding democracy, hollowing democracy from within. Having said that, we also see today that the big pushback, at least one of the big pushbacks against what's happening, comes from the section of the media, not necessarily a section of the big mainstream media, maybe digital media, in fact, strongly so digital media. And that's making a difference, even at the margins, I believe. We get to know about things from this section of the media. The media is also panned out into social media, and so we have far more multiple sources of information. Having said that, you know, in all the draconian measures, aggrandizement of the state that we've seen, especially when it comes to freedom of speech and expression, Article 19.2 becomes, is cited so often, the need for reasonable restrictions. Of course, this is cited for all kinds of unreasonable restrictions. Was the original sin being the First Amendment itself, or at least the part of the First Amendment which modified Article 19.2 and brought in public order, which was Jawaharlal Nehru's doing, perhaps for not specifically looking at media freedoms rather than the exigency of the time where he was, I think, trying to combat the right and the left, or the communists and the right at the same time, wanting to abolish perhaps, to stop organizer from writing the way it was writing. He goes on to take on Ramesh, the magazine that he wrote, and preventing it from coming into Madras. So was the original sin, otherwise, in contrast, the First Amendment of the US actually empowers the press. I mean, Congress shall make no laws which abridge freedom of the press or freedom of speech. Here we actually took away from it, and we are paying the price today. And therefore, when we blame the media, the media is fighting in a field with, like the IPKF in the Sri Lanka days, one hand tied behind your back. You can't do anything. You don't have the powers. You have only an implicit power or an extended power by virtue of the power of any citizen under Article 19.1 ANG and so on. So do you see the need to empower the media in order to for it to fulfill its role as a fourth estate?
Your question in a nutshell is a very interesting question, is whether we should at all what are the need of having the 19 defamation exception to free speech.
Isn't it violative of basic doctrine?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
so let me...
basic structure, sorry.
Let me start by suggesting that the answer is in your question itself. Number one, did you ask this question prior to, let us say, 2010 or 14? Or even prior to, let us say, 2000? Forget governments. The fact that 19.2 has been there more or less from independence came shortly afterwards. People didn't really ask the question that you have a reasonable restriction to free speech. Contempt is a reasonable restriction, defamation is a reasonable restriction, some anti-national statement, the heads were there. See, point number one is that you must forget US. The US Constitution is drafted differently. The whole structure is to give you a right. And then each case by judge-made law puts the restriction. They have not drafted any restriction. That was, of course, 250 years prior to us, the drafting. So they gave the right. The restrictions came by actual practice. None of the clauses have a restriction really, put except one or two of them. So keep that aside. My question is that all these exceptions and the entire structure of 19 Article 1, A or B or C or D has reasonable restrictions on certain considerations. The question never arose because laws are drafted on the basis of reasonable expectation of reasonable use. And even if there is misuse, reasonable misuse. See, they are not drafted on the basis that you must make the law foolproof from misuse. Because nobody can draft it like that. Now, if you actually see the figures and the statistics, the use or misuse of defamation power for almost 50, 60 years of our republic has been very reasonable. It's been hardly been very, the individual journalists have borne the brunt, but it has not been rampant. The use of the sedition power, which according to me should have gone after 1962, that judgment, which said that an overt act must be there, has been not a terror. It has been there, but it's been a sleeping giant. It's been a somnolent giant. All this is happening because I am always entitled to misuse power. The problem is the power is there, it is predicated on reasonable use. My shorter direct answer to your question is no, I think defamation, sovereignty of the nation, contempt, and the few other things we have in 19.2 are theoretically necessary in any republic or a constitutional democracy. It is, after all, India in 1950 or 47 was an eclectic mix of the best things from various constitutions. They spent 3 years traveling around the world and picked up what was best. And this was the majority view across the world. So it is nothing wrong in the structure. What you are now finding wrong is the way sedition is being used, is the way defamation is being used. Well, again, it depends very much on your use and misuse. Ironically, I must add a footnote here. Subramaniam Swamy filed a petition saying that at least the criminal part of defamation should be held to be unconstitutional. There's a lot of merit to that. It's one of the few meritorious things he has done.
Yes.
I was the main counsel opposing it. And I succeeded, which meant that because of the success I had in Justice Deepak Mishra's judgment, criminal defamation also has been held to be constitutional, not per se unconstitutional. Apart from civil, he never challenged civil. But Justice Mishra in that judgment has cribbed and confined and circumferred it with lots of limitations. You must use it in a reasonable way, this way, these conditions, by which time is perfectly valid. Now, a law-making process is giving you the principle. It's for the courts to decide how genuinely that principle is applicable. I can theoretically file a criminal defamation against you for some of the things you have said today. It's for the judge to throw it out. Or for that matter, against me, more likely against me. I've spoken longer. So, but the point is, it is ultimately the good sense of the prosecutor, first and foremost, they should not file. And the second good sense is of the judge to throw it out. Unfortunately, that is where the rub lies today. And that is why you are asking a question. Nothing is much wrong with the construct or the concept or the language of the law. What is wrong is the way it is being used, misused, and more importantly, the slowness or the laggardness with which courts are acting and not quashing it. Suppose 10 courts across the country were to do it for 10 cases, the message would be clear. It will change.
Thank you. I think we'll open this up now to questions from the audience. Anyone could raise your hand or just get up because I may not be spotting the right person. Please. Is there a micro? Just wait for a microphone that's just coming to you, yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is P. Magesh, and I am an advocate in DMK's legal wing and practicing in Madras High Court. My respects to my brother Rakesh Ranganathan and gratitude to the dignitaries present here. Thank you for permitting this question, sir. Sir, we see that when a lie is oft repeated, people start to believe it as the truth. And we see that the present party at the center as well as the powers behind them are making an assault on the democracy by constant lies and false narratives. And people start to believe that truly they are in danger, the majority population, from the minorities. And we in Tamil Nadu have managed to keep these divisive forces at bay. How do we make sure that these false narratives are combated effectively on a national level? And how do we remove the fears from the mind of the general people that they are not in danger? Thank you, sir.
Thanks for an important question, but I could have another 2-hour lecture on this. And also there is no, I wish I had that magic button to answer your question. Because if I had that magic button and your question could be answered, how to stop this, I think we'd all be in a far better state of affairs. So I really must confess my inability, but I can only say this. Ultimately, please get it out of your mind, by the way, that there is a central government, the central level, and there is no central government hanging in the air. Everything sits on a state. So everywhere there is a state. Here it is you, elsewhere there is some other state. The only quick, short answer I can give is that one way to control it is at the individual level. The collectivity and the aggregation of what you describe amorphously as central government is only a collectivity and aggregation of individuals. If more and more individuals like you speak up in a moderate, straightforward way, not in a rabid manner, you will find it diminishing. But the problem is that for a variety of reasons of fear, hesitation, lack of knowledge, or indeed a climate created where you start believing in it, you don't speak up. At that point, it's your job to tell your neighbor that these are the truth, this is the situation. And you'll be surprised in particular advocates. An advocate at the bottom level of a block, according to me, is an influencer of at least 50 people. The very nature of advocates is such that they will be influencers. They will be protagonists. They are people who are generally, listened to. Not necessarily agreed to, but listened to. So therefore, it is ultimately the only magic wand is to speak up when you think it's wrong and advise others around you. You can't change the whole world, but you can change at least the atmosphere around you.
Thank you. Anyone?
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I am a professor at Bharat Law College, Chennai. On behalf of my students, I have a question. When we say pillars of democracy, it also includes the people. Honorable Justice recently said that the demography needs to remain the same if our constitution needs to exist, and the constitution will cease to exist if the demography changes, and we need to follow traditions and dharma. And our Honorable His Excellency, the Governor also insists on this dharma and the Sanatana dharma. What do you see is the role of the people and in the light of this dharma versus the constitution, which is supreme? Thank you, sir.
You see, two or three things. One, there is no necessary antagonism or fight between two precepts, one of dharma, one of constitution. This is a created, imagined conflict. And it serves people well to create and imagine this conflict because it helps them. One. Two, if at all there is ever a situation of an inevitable conflict between dharma and constitution, I'll tell you why it can't be, because by definition dharma means law. It doesn't mean what dharma which you are talking about, it means something quite different. So by definition it can't be. But assuming there is an irreconcilable conflict between the two, then clearly the constitution is supreme. Third, and I don't quite see a conflict, but I'm just answering a question. Third, I am not one of those who reacts on what I call these soft symbolic things. I don't find anything wrong in referring to scriptures and Sanatan Dharma and our heritage. For example, I give you a very silly small example, but it's been the butt of many jokes. My favorite two colors are green and orange. And I didn't wear it today, but I'm very tempted to wear orange all the time. So people are, they pull my leg. So I said, since when have I ceded the space that all orange will be worn only by a particular political party? I'm a proud Jain or I'm a proud Hindu. I like to go to the temple. I not like to go to the temple. It has nothing to do with what you do. So these are relatively soft symbols. If a person believes that a particular principle, and there are lots and lots of excellent things in our dharma which you can quote in our judgments, in so many texts, no problem. The problem arises when you either do what you said in the first question, you imagine a conflict. For example, if you pick up the organizer or the Panchajani, I don't know, I think the organizer issue, one day after the Constitution was finally framed in 1949 November, or 2 days or 1 week after, you will find an extreme criticism that this whole structure is wrong. This Constitution should not be like this, it should be on a totally different precept. Now there you are creating a conflict between Dharma and Constitution. Because 3 years, some 200 people sat in the assembly, 300 people, and drafted it, and you suddenly write an article the next day saying that this is all nonsense, because it doesn't conform to my idea of Dharma. Once you have a constitution by an assembly which votes it, you have to jolly well accept it. And then things like the religious precept, the prism with which you see it, I think the simplest answer is that so long as you let these private things be private persons' job, then all the answers fall into place. The moment I start imposing on him and he starts imposing on her, that's when the problem arises. It's as simple as that.
Go ahead. Is there a microphone here? The gentleman here in front. Would you come?
Sir, good morning, sir. I'm
Oh, somebody else is.
myself, sir. Here.
I can't see you. Oh, there.
So my name is Farid Nisha. I am an enrolled advocate and I have been giving awareness to a lot of college students as well as school students. I get this repeated question where they are inspiring or they want to be an like advocate or in future. What they put forward me, the question is like, ma'am, I would like to go and see all other courts, which is not possible for them because at the seeing some other seniors, they feel that they are in the same will like Swami Vivekananda is saying. But that means they are not going for another high courts. If they are in Madurai High Court, they are into it until their life ends. So what will be the solution? Because this Rakesh Foundation is being started and initiated to make the best of best students to take and give the opportunity to them as well. I feel that they should reach till the Supreme Court, from the lower court, all the other high courts of 29 states, and then they should go because filing and all other because of COVID has been changed.
Madam,
so
I
I would like to
understand.
have solutions for this.
I understand.
Yes, sir.
You are right, but you must acknowledge that your task has been considerably simplified now. As it is, we are in a global village. Forget Madurai to Delhi. You can cover Madurai to California. But more than that, today, at least for the Supreme Court, not other courts, Supreme Court, actually functional operational technology has made it possible for you, by you I mean your students, to participate in every which way, in any proceeding. Those days are gone when you had the inhibition to even want to go from Madurai to Supreme Court. Take for example constitution benches. I have argued 5 constitution benches, one behind the other in the last. They are all live telecast. If your students are diligent and they like a subject, they can sit down and hear it and take notes and enjoy it fully. It's a live, contemporaneous, simultaneous, full participation as if you're sitting in court. And much better because no expense, no hassle of traveling, no dirt, no COVID fear, nothing. Second, you have so many other ways of following the proceedings in any particular subject you like. So I don't think that's anymore an issue. It's a logistical issue which used to be. There can always be improvements. Connectivity can be improved. You can provide infrastructure where you are. But in principle, it is now a global village. It is also a global judicial village.
Yes, sir. We have time for 2 more questions, one by the gentleman here and one more. Yeah, thanks.
Sir, you were touching upon the way in which we need to handle our army carefully.
I can't hear. Where are you speaking?
Can you speak more into the mic? Yeah.
Sir, during our constitution framing, the framers thought conscription is not necessary. Conscription, as it is followed in certain countries, where youth will be trained for some years and they can enter into civil life, and whenever it is required, they will come and fight for the country.
What is not
So
necessary?
no,
Conscription.
conscription.
Okay, okay.
So conscription was not considered important when our constitution was framed.
Yes.
But it has come in some other form now. To train selected youth from selected pockets of the country, to give them training and to make use of them in a different way. And you were also touching upon the point that we have to be very careful in handling army. Jingoism should not find place, especially when the top CEO of this country was addressing uniformed forces, and he was instigating them even without really instigating. He was saying that Pahadi has been paid to do away with him or his life. So that way he was making a kind of sentimental
Sir,
appeal.
we know you are directly to the question because we are learning.
I'm coming to the question now.
Okay.
Is it not necessary to frame a law, think in terms of it now, the uniformed forces will not enter into politics unless they complete 3 years or 5 years after their retirement from the army. For instance, V.K. Singh, he was trying to extend his term, it failed, but within few months of his retirement, he enters politics.
Sir, please,
he becomes
question,
a
sir.
minister.
Question, sir, please.
So, the question is, the present establishment at the center is trying to mishandle all the institutions of democracy. Army is one that is left. Now, how to preserve the purity of army by way of bringing certain restrictions to uniform men to be influenced by politicians and enter into politics immediately after retirement. That's it.
Your question in one sentence is, should you ban the assumption of any post, you call it political post, 3 to 5 years after demitting office in the army? That's your one sentence question, right? Now, the answer is yes. In fact, I forgot maybe, I have proposed, and I should have mentioned it, it is part of my today's address, that for several constitutional posts, you must create a ban on 90% post-retirement employment. CAG, EC and CEC, Army Chief or some more ranks than that. But you need to do 2 or 3 more things before that, which is a problem. One, our retirement age is too low. Suppose you retire at 60 or I retire at 62. If I put a ban on all your activities after that, it actually can be gravely creative of injustice, even though it might help to preserve independence in 2 or 3 cases. So we have to sort that out. 2, since we can't sort it out easily because the bureaucracy retires 60, 62, therefore you stick to that age, you need to then bar certain kinds of employment. Parliament, constitutional posts, political posts as you put it. Third, you need to do it across the board for judges also. I have written openly about it. Judges can do ABC and no more. They can do arbitration, they can do a few more things. And you must immediately increase the High Court retirement age to 65. It is ridiculous that a Supreme Court judge retires at 65 and a High Court judge retires at 62. I have never found the reason for it. When I, as chairman of the committee in 2011, proposed it, one of the responses we got was, absolutely correct, Dr. Singhvi, we should do it, but then make the Supreme Court judges 67. So these are silly rules we have. So therefore now you must do it. My answer to you is yes, we must do it. Second, but we have to do it by specific legislation. We cannot be ad hoc. I cannot do it for 1 or 2 classes and not do it for 3 more classes. I cannot be done by judicial judgments. But yes, a beginning should be made, and it does create a greater degree of independence.
Next question, yes.
Let me add, by the way, one thing which people tend to forget. You know, the greatest independence comes from what? Can you guess? Something which is unheard of in India and can't really happen. US judges, even a federal judge, forget Supreme Court judge, is appointed for life. He only chooses to retire when he chooses. And some of them don't do it till they're on the hospital bed on ventilator. Even then they don't. But you know the enormous amount of independence it gives you. You cannot imagine. It's something we have not thought of. They are political appointees, but they have been any number. They are completely independent. They vote against their appointers all the time. Because even forget a Supreme Court judge, even a federal judge can't be removed for life. So that is real independence, but I don't expect that we can do it in India because we are a country where we need to give chance to others. But that is also real independence.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sir, as we have spoken about media and restriction and we being a global village, my question is related to it. According to me, my country knows best the value and effect of the opinion and views of its citizens who have their right to freedom of speech, expression and information guaranteed by the Constitution, and also their right to protest in a peaceful manner, which is again guaranteed by the Constitution. And again, saddening part is that this country has seen the largest number and the longest internet shutdowns till this date. How do you see internet shutdown for various purposes that the government sees fit including to control protest, to stop malpractice in teachers' examination, to arrest persons, etc., as a reasonable restriction to Article 19(1)(a)?
It's an important question. You are right and you are wrong. You are right because, or rather first you are wrong because, per se not to have the power to order internet shutdown may not be feasible. There are rare situations which are available in several other countries also where internet shutdown is necessary. When you have a real, genuine plague or epidemic of misinformation in an organized fashion by enemy elements, you need to have the power. Having said that, you are totally right. In India, it is the most misused, casually used power. It again comes down to use. In India, you know, it's like saying, what is that section? 144 of our CRPC. You can say that, why do you have 144? It's necessary because 144 is designed to prevent the aggregation and congregation of people which may create a problem of peace. It has now been found in surveys that even if you are sending a child to school, you are imposing 144. It's the most misused power. You have got any number of completely unjustified misuses of 144. But it's been going on in our country. So the answer to your query is that it has to reduced immeasurably. It has to be reduced to vanishing point and only in genuine, rare cases. It is not meant for cases that examinations are being held and you have internet shut down. It is not even in a case of a minor riot or a disturbance. It is in some grave situations of national security where it can be used. And that happens only by actual application of mind in a decent, reasonable manner. What is happening today, you say, I have the power, so I'll use it in every case.
Thank you. What is that last question from anybody? The last question? Yes, there. That is the last question. Brother, you want a question? Here? You want a question? Please wait one more.
Hello, sir. This is Shuaib Ahmed. I'm a student of law, sir. Sir, I have a small question pertaining to Committee of Privileges, sir. There's a practical situation when it comes to Committee of Privileges, sir. Sir, when it comes to Committee of Privileges, whether they have the power to suspend a parliamentarian, because it is a punitive measure, my lord. Because when it comes to punitive measures, whether they can issue an order of punitive measure is what I would like to ask you, sir.
Well, I have to be very guarded in my reply. I am a member of the Committee of Privileges of Indian Parliament. But the answer to your question is, in theory, yes. It's an old power from British Parliament. In theory, you cannot say that a Committee of Privileges cannot suspend you even after they find in an appropriate case that you have committed a breach of privilege of Parliament. A breach of privilege of Parliament means, in a nutshell, it's too large a issue to discuss in a short while, means that you are doing things to obstruct in a wider sense, the conduct of proceedings in Parliament. Or you are doing things by third parties to obstruct the access to Parliament by me, a member of Parliament. So it's the broad definition of privileges. Now, if you are actually found in an appropriate case to be doing those things, if you are every day dancing on the floor of the house, if you are every day throwing things at the speaker, you can be. The Privileges Committee can do it. But again, the question comes down to how you are using it. You have to go, as they say, the devil lies in the detail. God also lies in detail, devil also lies in detail. In this case I have cited of the lady took a video shot of the speech during Prime Minister's speech. It is clearly prohibited by circulars. When she was sent a notice, immediately she was temporarily suspended, what is known as interim suspension. Then after that, she admitted next day or 2 days later that I did it. I did not realize it, I was unaware, and I unconditionally apologize. The question that arises that instead of 2 days or 4 days of suspension, she has now suffered some 3 weeks and is continuing under suspension till the next session starts, which means that she has suffered the last part of the previous session. Next session will start in mid-July, the monsoon session. Now the question is, it is continuing because the Privileges Committee of which I am a part is considering that while the lady has acknowledged that she did, she must remain under suspension. Now whether it's right or wrong, I cannot say because I am a member, but you have the facts before you.
Thank you, sir. One last question, sir. Yes, last question.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir. This is Bhuvaneshwaran. So I'm having a short question. So today the topic is pillars of Indian democracy. So constitutionally, so right to vote, it is not a fundamental right. It is only a constitutional right and a statutory right.
Statutory right.
Supreme Court has retired in several judgments. So what is your view regarding to that comment?
Well, exactly that issue is now being referred to a larger bench. Exactly that. For many years, it has been held to be a statutory right. There are many judgments. Somebody has now filed a petition saying that why the hell should voting not be a constitutional right, because democracy is a basic structure. The basis of democracy is voting, so you should have this. So that issue is now referred. The law today as it stands is not it's only a statutory right, can be curtailed. For example, people in jail cannot insist as a matter of right that I can go and vote. You have to apply to the court will decide, and then they will send you or not send you. But my view is that it really doesn't matter whether voting is called a constitutional right or a statutory right. It does matter if you start passing laws, but in that sense, the practical issue today is that you should at least allow voting to all incarcerated MPs and MLAs. That is my personal view. Because MPs and MLAs, unless they are barred from some very special reason, should be allowed to vote even though they are incarcerated, under custody, under control. Even that is not allowed today. But anyway, your larger issue will be decided in the referred matter. It is still pending.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I know that you are an outstanding counsel, but standing for 2.5 hours over here, and you are given a very... Thank you. Big applause for him, the senior advocate. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Now we request Dr. Raghavi to thank the audience.
Honorable Dr. ABISHEIK SINGHVI, Mr. Shashi Kumar, respected advocates, law students, honorable judges, and respected attendees of the law lecture series, a very good afternoon to everyone here. I stand here to thank every one of you for having attended the law lecture series today. And I thank Dr. Singhvi for coming all the way down to Chennai for giving such an amazing speech for us today. And when he was approached, he hasn't taken a minute to say yes. So thank you, sir, for readily accepting and coming down all the way to Chennai. I think it's such an eye-opener for every one of us, and I believe that the lawyers and the law students here would have benefited by your speech today. Thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Sasi Kumar, a very well-known and a respected journalist, and also the chairman of Asian School of Journalism, for having co-chaired Dr. Singhvi today. It's such a pleasure to have you here, sir. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Mr. Sundar, director of Roja Muttaya Library, for giving us such an elaborate introduction and also having joined the hands with Rakesh Law Foundation for conducting the law lecture series. I'd like to thank Justice Akbar Ali, sir, for not only conducting the event wonderfully in your way, but also for constantly supporting our family and stood with us in the hardest of our times. Thank you so much, sir. I'd want to mention especially about Member of Parliament, Madam Kanimoli Karunanidhi, and Honorable Minister Shekhar Babu for joining us today. And I would like to thank Hindu groups, N. Ram and N. Ravi, and also Mr. R. Balakrishnan sir for joining us today. I thank all the honorable judges, Justice P.D. Thinagaran, Justice K. Chandru, Justice C.T. Selvam, Justice Rajalango, Justice Sundar Mohan, and Justice Lakshmi Narayanan. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I thank Advocate General Mr. R. Shanmuga Sundaram, State Public Prosecutor Hassan Mohammed Jinnah, State Government Pleader P. Muthukumar, and State Government Pleader P. Tilak Kumar for joining us today. And I would like to thank all the additional Advocate General and law officers of the state. I also want to thank all the senior advocates for joining us today. I thank all the lawyers who have not only attended the meeting, but have also contributed the time and effort for the success of the event. I thank all the law students and the general public for joining us today. I especially want to thank Advocates P. Pachayappan and Advocate K.J. Saravanan for meticulously conducting the event for us today and also for providing us the lunch. I thank the Wings Company for having provided the lighting and sounding. I would want to thank the videographers and photographers and all the technicians behind the event. I thank the management of the Anna Centenary Library for providing us the venue today. I also want to thank the media for your constant and continuous support for us. I will be really failing my duty if I don't thank the Tamilana Talevar Dr. Karunanidhi for giving us, the people of Tamil Nadu, such a beautiful library. If I failed in mentioning anybody's name or failed thanking you anybody here, please do consider that you all are my family. So thank you all, goodbye, and a very happy birthday to my dearest brother. Thank you.
ஒரு சிறிய அறிவிப்பு. மதிய உணவு தயாராக இருக்கிறது. முதலில் சட்டக்கல்லூரி மாணவர்களை சென்று உணவருந்துமாறு கேட்டுக்கொள்கிறேன். பிறகு நாம் வழக்கறிஞர்கள் அனைவரும் உணவருந்த செல்லலாம். முக்கிய விருந்தினருக்கு தனியாக இங்கே உணவு தயாராக இருக்கிறது. அனைவரும் உணவருந்தி செல்லுமாறு கேட்டுக்கொள்கிறேன். நன்றி, வணக்கம்.